by, I guess, my job I am, but we actually get out and do the work. And this situation...
You imply that we don't get out and do the work, which is that's fair. That's fair, Sheriff.
I'm not saying that.
Fair.
I'm not saying that. But the reality is that, I mean, it affects the community because we are a small community, a small farming community of all nationalities, and we are very close to each other, and we care about each other very much.
In your recommendations, you talk about allowing you to enforce the law, and that might mean that you actually cooperate with federal officials. So, if I understand your Keep Washington Working law, that's the statute there. Are you allowed to hold someone with an ICE detainer?
We are not.
Are you allowed to transfer someone if ICE requests that you transfer them to their custody?
According to the KWW, no.
So the state law actually directly, not indirectly, not impliedly, it actually directly defies federal law, federal statute.
That's what I understand, yes.
Yeah, because federal statute says if you get a detainer, you're supposed to hold.
Yeah.
You're supposed to hold. That's what federal law says, and you can't do that there.
Correct.
How does that impact the safety of your community?
Well, ours is impacted in a great way because, one, my jail has been closed for 3 years, and I find that ironic in this situation as well. But it impacts us in a great way because, like I believe it was Mr. Jordan was explaining, putting people out onto the street and having them get caught again becomes a bigger problem. We're not arresting on immigration status. We're putting people in jail for crimes they committed in our community. And then ICE, because of public records that are available and things like that, they have the ability to find out who's in our custody and where they are and when they're released and all those kind of things. And they are basically released to their custody in the opposite way, similar to Denver in most cases.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time has expired.
Ms. Jayapal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I said in my opening, there are a lot of reasons why states and localities have adopted policies to leave immigration enforcement to federal government where it belongs. For some, it's about fostering trust with local communities. When immigrant communities know that calling 911 won't result in deportation for themselves or a family member, they're actually more willing to report and help law enforcement solve crimes, which makes all of us safer. For others, it's an important factor is legal liability. Courts all over the country, just to counter what my good colleague from Arizona said, have ruled that when local law enforcement complies with civil immigration detainer requests, and to be clear, an immigration detainer is a request, and continues to detain someone pursuant to a detainer when they otherwise would have been released, it's actually an unlawful detention, and it's a violation of the Fourth Amendment. So Sheriff Wagner, I want to thank you again for being here and for the work that you do to support your community, and I believe you when you say you want to keep all of your residents in Adams County safe. You can just give me simple yes or no's to this. At any time since 2019, has the Adams County Sheriff's Office given the federal government personal information of any Adams County residents, like fingerprints, dates of birth, home addresses, or driver's license numbers? Just turn your mic on, Sheriff. Thank you.
We do a program called Stone Garden.
So just a yes or no is fine. Do you give, it's a simple question, do you give the federal government personal information of Adams County residents like fingerprints, dates of birth, home addresses, and driver's license numbers?
I'm not aware of fingerprints, but I do believe we give public information to those people.
And,
yes.
And how often has your office done that?
It depends on what you're talking about. You want yes and no answers, or do you want me to explain?
Well, in this one, I'm asking you if you have numbers for that.
Okay.
If you can give me
I don't have numbers, but we do a Stone Garden program through the Border Patrol, which is funded through the state as well.
Okay. And at any time since 2019, has the Adams County Sheriff's Office held people beyond their release date in order to facilitate their pickup by civil immigration enforcement officers?
Not that I'm aware of.
So you're following the Keep Washington Working Act in that way, and that's good to hear. I want to go on to some questions for Major Franklin. Let me turn to you. One of the studies that I submitted found that mandatory information sharing between local police and ICE led to a 16% increase in crime against Hispanics. And let me be clear, that 16% increase means 1.3 million more crimes. Can you help us understand this statistic and why jurisdictions with community trust policies in place experience less crime and why their residents feel safer?
Yes. So to be effective, and a good part of my career was in criminal investigation for quite a few years. And we first need to get people to report crimes before we can even begin to investigate them. And when there's no trust between the police and the community, many people will not even report crimes. And this hasn't just become evident with the immigrant community. I grew up in West Baltimore, and I experienced times in my neighborhood where we really had trust issues. Many of my friends, many people that I knew would not even report the crime of a robbery, of being a victim of a crime. And then we need witnesses. Once we begin to investigate a crime, we need witnesses. So you have to have that trust that we, the police, are going to do the right thing. And in the immigrant community, if they believe, just believe that their immigration status is going to be questioned, or maybe that of another family member, or that of a community member which they are friends with, they're not going to cooperate with us. We've seen this time and time again, but when you can establish that trust, you see, we cannot be effective in solving crimes, and most of the people who commit the violence is a very small number.
Right.
If we can get them, if we can focus on them, get them convicted, charged convicted, then we have a great chance of reducing crime.
I just have a few seconds left here, but jurisdictions that adopted sanctuary policies experienced a 52 to 62% reduction in the domestic homicide rate for Hispanic women. Does that track with your experience as a law enforcement officer in jurisdictions with those policies?
Yes, as creating the first domestic violence unit in the Maryland State Police, as being the president of Turnaround Incorporated, which was about domestic violence in Baltimore City, shelter services and counseling services, yes, those numbers are very familiar to me. And there's a great report out, I believe it's...
Time's expired.
Usually the witness can finish answering.
Mr. Tiffany.
Thank you, Mr.
He did
Chair.
answer. The answer was yes. It was a yes or no question,
just
and he
finishing his
added
answer.
quite a bit more.
A
Mr.
strong
Tiffany.
yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Major Franklin, there's an organization or a publication, safehome.org. They listed Baltimore as the deadliest large city. Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of that report. Or...
Yeah, they just last year, was in 2024, it just surpassed Memphis and Detroit. Mr. Holman, when a detainer has been issued, isn't that as a result of someone committing a crime?
ICE is reaching out to them to get them in custody, and they're on the radar likely because a crime was committed. That's why they're in that local jail.
So federal money flows to jurisdictions around the United States at taxpayers' expense to try to fight crime. Should taxpayers continue to fund sanctuary jurisdictions?
No, not at all. If you are in defiance of federal law and you're not working with federal law enforcement, you shouldn't receive a darn dime. Again, there's a lot of cooperative jurisdictions out there under President Trump. The 287G agreements that we're seeing, kind of the opposite of a sanctuary jurisdiction, has skyrocketed since President Trump took office. Those jurisdictions should be rewarded and helped for acting in accordance with federal law.
Should federal facilities be moved out of jurisdictions that are sanctuary cities?
If you're talking detention facilities or something like that, a lot of them...
Let me give you an example, and I'm going to ask Mr. Chairman to introduce this letter I sent to Doge, would ask unanimous consent to enter that letter. But anyhow, I sent a letter. The SBA is moving facilities out of Boston, which is a sanctuary city, and I sent a letter to Doge saying, would you look into Dane County, Wisconsin, which is Madison, would you look into moving facilities out of there if they're going to continue to be a sanctuary county? Do you think that's appropriate?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Sheriff, so I mentioned Dane County, Wisconsin, And there was a situation where a gang member from Venezuela, Tren de Aragua, gang member, he was charged with false imprisonment and battery in Dane County last year, went on to Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin, which is about 100 miles from Madison to Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin, over on the Mississippi River. And this gang member was charged with domestic violence, sexual assault, child abuse, and strangulation by the Prairie du Chien police department. Does it surprise you that another community is affected when there is a sanctuary community that is not honoring ICE detainers?
No.
Does it make it more dangerous for people throughout the region, not just, let's use this example of Dane County, Wisconsin, does it make it more dangerous for people throughout a region as a result of having these sanctuary policies?
I think like the gentleman over here said earlier, I think every situation is different, every location is different, every circumstance is different. But I do think the policies matter, and the policies that we're faced with in sanctuary policy is, it's too hampering for the situation that we're dealing with on the ground.
Ms. Carter Walters, so you know that Wisconsin is just north of you in Chicago, and I just cited Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin is 100 miles from Madison, Wisconsin, and Kenosha, Wisconsin is only 64 miles north of Chicago. Should people in Wisconsin be concerned about the sanctuary policies that are in Chicago?
Exactly, because they don't just stay in Chicago. They're in Indiana. They're all in the suburbs. So yes, they definitely should be afraid.
Why in the world do civic leaders like Mayor Johnson want to advance policies like this that not only make their own city less safe, but the entire region less safe?
Because we believe that that's how they're funneling money and stealing our tax dollars. So that's why we are demanding a forensic audit on how a breakdown of how those funds were allocated, because we have yet received anything of a breakdown to show how our tax dollars were spent. So yes, we believe that's how they're funneling the money, and that's why we're asking for a forensic audit, and we want arrests being made.
Mr. Chairman, I think these witnesses make the case so well that it is not just the sanctuary community that is being affected by these policies that they are implementing. It's an entire region. Most of the people of Wisconsin are affected as a result of what's going on in Dane County, Wisconsin, and Chicago, Illinois. It is time for this to stop, and there needs to be consequences for what is going on with these sanctuary communities. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Raskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Major Franklin, you're famous in Maryland. Your career in law enforcement has involved fighting violent gangs, drug traffickers, illegal gun trafficking from other states that have weaker laws than Maryland. But you've also studied law enforcement and worked on it, not just at the micro level, but at the macro level. I wonder if you could explain how this works. My colleagues are talking about horrific, gruesome cases of undocumented people who engage in murder or rape, serious crimes like that. If someone is engaged in a crime like that and they have a warrant for the person's arrest and they bring it to a local or state official who's got control over their custody, if they're in their custody for another reason, doesn't the local government have to cooperate with that warrant and turn that person over immediately to the federal authorities?
Yes. On a warrant, yes, we do. I don't know one case where we have not done so with a warrant.
Yeah, I was searching. I couldn't find a single case where there was any local government that did not cooperate with a warrant that was to demand turning over the body of a person who had engaged in a serious crime. In fact, I saw an article about President Trump, who has been touting his ICE arrests. Half of them were people who were in local custody, and he asked for them to be turned over. They were being held for serious crimes or other kinds of crimes, and then they were deported, and he got them, based on based on a warrant. So if we're not talking about a warrant situation, right, then I come back to my puzzlement about why my colleagues who control the U.S. Congress right now are not engaged in trying to come up with a comprehensive immigration reform package. I mean, I'll give you an example. At the end of the last Congress, we had a bipartisan deal on toughening up the border with more officers, more patrols, more asylum judges, lots of new technology. The most conservative members of the U.S. Senate on the Republican side were championing it, advancing it. It had bipartisan support in the Senate. And then Donald Trump tanked it, basically saying for political reasons he didn't want it. He did not want a comprehensive immigration border solution. He wanted a problem to run against. And I see a lot of that in today's discussion. It's amazing to me that rather than engage in the hard work, maybe not even so hard anymore, of coming up with a bipartisan immigration solution, we would rather be beating up on local governments for not doing the job of the federal government. Now, but let's say that someone thought, okay, well, we really should commandeer the resources, the personnel, the machinery of the local governments, even though it's against the Constitution and against the 10th Amendment. But let's say they think that, and they want to use law enforcement not to turn over murderers and rapists and so on, but for routine immigration enforcement. All right, how would that work if, say, they came to, you know, a particular city or county and say the vast majority of the undocumented people here we know are working in hotels or agriculture on farms or the construction sector. Could a city have the resources to say, we're going to send in raids of police on construction sites, on farms, in hotels to arrest all of these people that we think are here illegally?
We don't have the resources for that. We don't have the people for that. We're struggling to find people, to hire people, and we just don't have the resources. We have calls waiting, we're call hopping, you know, one day after next.
The federal government's got a lot of money. We spend millions and millions of dollars just flying Donald Trump down to Florida, to Mar-a-Lago, to go play golf while he's crashing the stock market. Why doesn't the federal government spend that money? A locality might say. The cities are pretty hard up for money, right? They don't want to be invading all of the hotels and construction sites to go and look for undocumented workers. I mean, do you think that's a fair request to put on the localities?
No, it's not.
Well, seems to me that the problem here is we have people not doing their jobs in Washington, and they want to blame local governments and put the pressure on them. I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Gentleman yields back. Chairman Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sheriff, are you familiar with the Department of Homeland Security Immigration Detainer Notice of Action form? You familiar with these forms?
I've heard of them, yes.
Yeah, okay. And these forms, down about halfway down the page, it says, it is therefore requested that you, this is going to local law enforcement, requested that you notify DHS as early as practicable, at least 48 hours if possible, before the alien in your custody is released. All right? Is that partisan, or is that just common sense?
Depends on who you ask, but it is
well,
common sense.
The ranking member said we need to function in a bipartisan way. I don't think that's partisan. That's just saying, hey, you got a bad guy, at least someone who's been charged with crime in your possession. He's also an illegal migrant. Can you give us a 48 hours heads up before you release him to the streets?
Sure.
That makes sense to me, right? I don't think that's partisan. I think that's just common sense. Mr. Hallman, are you familiar how this form works? This detainer process is supposed to work? All right, the next line says, maintain custody of the alien for a period not to exceed 48 hours beyond the time. Again, we're requesting you do. They're not demanding. We're just requesting you help us out. Law enforcement, working with other law enforcement to protect the safety of law enforcement and, of course, the public at large, beyond the time when he or she would otherwise have been released from your custody to allow DHS to assume custody. Again, that seems like common sense to me. But sanctuary policies prevent these two requests from taking place. Is that right? If you're a sanctuary state, sanctuary city, you don't comply with these. You may give them we're going to give you a 10-minute notice. We're going to release them and then tell you we already released them. That's how it works in these sanctuary cities, in these sanctuary states. Is that right, Mr. Hammond?
That's correct, too. It's even interesting, too, under the Biden administration, you have a lot of state and local law enforcement who think that they're not going to comply with ICE based on their experiences under the Biden administration. ICE had policies in place that made it so hard for enforcement and removal officers to actually work with these jails.
Yeah.
They made it next to impossible. So you have all of these jails that think, oh, I don't know if I'm going to comply. I may get penalized if a state puts in an aggressive restriction on that. But everything is going to be streamlined. If they want to comply, it will be a good process.
Yeah, let's put up on the screen. Are you familiar with the name Abraham Gonzalez, Mr. Hallman? Do you know this guy? Abraham Gonzalez?
I do not.
Okay, this guy was released this year, February 28, 25. He was released. Look at what the sheriff's department put here. This is a ICE notification. They put the stamp on there, being released to the streets. Now, this guy had been in custody for 345 days. And ICE had sent this very form asking, hey, can you give us a 48-hour heads up before this guy who was charged with aggravated assault, charged with stealing an automobile, charged with menacing, can you just give us a heads up? And guess what Sanctuary City, Denver did? They called him 1 hour before, and ICE couldn't get there, and they released this guy to the streets as they stamped on the form. Now, what I find interesting, can we put that back up again? What I find interesting is, under the section flag, see it over there on the right-hand side? It says he's cleared, but then look what it says, violent to staff. So the very people who released him to the streets knew this guy. He'd been charged again with aggravated assault, stealing a car, but he'd also been violent to the very people in the jail who were holding him, and they still wouldn't give notice to ICE. And then, as I said in my opening statement, this guy is released to the streets. ICE goes out to arrest him. Officer gets hurt. They had to tase the guy, so the migrant gets hurt. Tell me how that is not, tell me why that we should have that kind of policy happen, Mr. Hallman.
Well, we shouldn't. It doesn't keep our communities safer in any sense. And again, what they're trying to do here is they say, hey, at least we tried. An hour, heads up, or whatever. But how can they look at that man to release him on the streets, knowing the crimes that have been committed, knowing that risk? How can they say, hey, we'll see you later, as he goes off and could potentially commit another crime down the line? I mean, is it worth it to instill trust with the immigrant community? How about, the citizens, and how about the harm that they could face due to the unknown of releasing a dangerous criminal alien to the streets?
They knew this guy had a propensity to be violent to law enforcement because he had done it in their very jail, and they can't give federal law enforcement a heads up. Sheriff Wagner, would you have given him a heads up?
I think in that circumstance I would.
Yeah, you certainly would, but for people who do what you would do, you're now getting sued for that, right? Your attorney general is coming after you.
Yeah, and as the gentleman over here said, we should stay out of local business, right? And so here I am with the state attorney coming down on me for trying to juggle the whole mess.
Because that's how law enforcement, you're supposed to work with other law enforcement when you can, to not violate the Constitution, just be in good common sense way to make sure people are safe, law enforcement safe, public is safe, and frankly, as I said before, even the migrant is safer when you do it that way, when you do it the common sense way versus the Sanctuary City way. And that's what we really have to, I think, that's really the decision here. Common sense or Sanctuary City way. I think common sense wins out every time. With that, I yield back.
Jim,
Representative Jim Jordan there with the question.